The seasons changed, and with them came hardship that no one had expected. A terrible drought swept through the land, drying up the rivers and turning the once fertile soil into dust. Day after day, the sun burned mercilessly, and the crops withered before they could be harvested. Bayo watched helplessly as his farm, his only source of income, slowly died before his eyes. At first, he tried to save what little he could, watering the plants with whatever water they could fetch from the deep wells, but it was not enough. The ground was too dry, and nothing would grow. One by one, his animals, weak from hunger and thirst, began to die. The chickens stopped laying eggs, the goats became too thin to sell, and the cows that once provided milk collapsed in the heat. Bayo and Sabela were running out of food, and there was no money left. He tried to find work in the village, but so many farmers were struggling that no one could afford to hire him. Desperate, he went to the village elders and asked for help, but the same people who once praised him now turned him away. "You had a good wife, Bayo," one of the elders said, "but you let greed blind you. Now you must face the consequences of your choices." Bayo lowered his head in shame. He had once been respected, but now no one pitied him. Sabela, who had once walked through the village with pride, now wandered the streets in rags. The women who used to admire her beauty now whispered about her downfall. The friends she once laughed with no longer wanted anything to do with her. She had made too many enemies, insulted too many people, and betrayed the only sister who truly loved her. At home, there was nothing left to eat. Sabela sat on the floor, holding her empty stomach, her once soft hands now rough and dirty. She turned to Bayo with anger in her eyes. "This is all your fault," she snapped. "If you were a real man, we wouldn't be starving." Bayo looked at her, tired and defeated. "No, Sabela," he said quietly. "This is our fault. We destroyed the one person who truly loved us, and now we are paying the price." Sabela said nothing. She knew he was right, but the truth was too bitter to swallow. She had fought so hard to take Bayo for herself, but what had she gained? No food, no money, no happiness. She had won the man, but she had lost everything else. Adhira left the village with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of sorrow. She had lost her home, her husband, and the sister she had once loved, but she refused to let her pain break her. She walked for miles until she reached the bustling city, a place filled with noise, movement, and opportunities she had never known before. At first, life was difficult. She had no money, no family, and no one to turn to. But Adhira was not one to give up. She took whatever small jobs she could find, sweeping floors in markets, washing clothes for strangers, and carrying heavy baskets for traders. The city was harsh, but she worked hard, never complaining. One day, as she was delivering goods to a wealthy merchant's shop, the owner noticed her. He was an old man with sharp eyes and a kind heart. He saw something different in Adhira. She was not just a poor girl struggling to survive. She was strong, determined, and full of dignity despite her hardships. "You work harder than anyone I've seen," he told her. "Come work for me. I will pay you fairly." Adhira accepted without hesitation. She learned quickly, and soon, the merchant trusted her with important tasks. She managed his shop, handled sales, and even gave suggestions that helped grow the business. With time, the old merchant treated her like a daughter, teaching her the secrets of trade and wealth. Years passed, and Adhira was no longer a poor village girl. She became a successful trader, owning shops, lands, and businesses. People respected her, and her name was spoken with admiration across Ngarama and beyond. She built a home grander than the one she had lost, with servants, fine clothes, and more wealth than she ever imagined. But despite all she had gained, she never forgot the pain of betrayal. She had forgiven, but she had not forgotten. Somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that fate was not finished with her story. One day, destiny would bring her back to where it all began. The sun was setting as Adhira's carriage rolled down the dusty road leading to Ngarama. She had not set foot in the village for years, but today she was returning, not as the broken woman who had been cast out, but as a powerful and successful businesswoman. The people who once whispered behind her back would now bow in respect. As the horses trotted forward, something caught her eye by the roadside. A frail woman sat on the ground, her arms stretched out, begging for food. Her once beautiful skin was now rough and pale, her hair tangled and unkempt. The fine clothes she used to wear were nothing but torn, dirty rags. Flies buzzed around her, and her sunken eyes held a look of deep sorrow. Adhira's heart skipped a beat. She knew this woman. It was Sabela. For a moment, Adhira just stared, unable to believe what she was seeing. This was the same sister who had once stolen her husband, the same woman who had mocked her pain and driven her out of her own home. But now, she was nothing more than a beggar on the streets, reduced to pleading for scraps from strangers. Sabela did not recognize the woman standing before her. She was too lost in hunger and misery to notice. She raised her trembling hands, her voice weak and desperate. "Please, just a little food. I haven't eaten in days." Adhira stepped forward, her fine silk dress flowing in the wind. The villagers passing by stopped to watch. They knew who she was. They knew what had happened all those years ago. And now, they were witnessing something no one had expected. Fate had brought Adhira and Sabela face to face once more. Sabela's eyes slowly lifted, and for the first time, she truly saw the woman standing before her. The rich, powerful, and graceful lady looking down at her was none other than Adhira. Her mouth fell open in shock, her lips trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to speak, but no words came out. Adhira did not move. She just stood there, gazing at the sister who had betrayed her, now brought to ruin by her own greed. It was a moment of justice, a moment of karma, and Sabela knew it. Sabela's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at the woman who had once been her sister, now standing tall with the wealth and power she had only dreamed of. Overcome with guilt and shame, Sabela's legs gave way, and she fell to her knees in the dirt. Her body shook as sobs racked her frame, and she cried out in agony, "Sister, forgive me. I was blinded by greed. I didn't know what I was doing. Please forgive me." Her voice was desperate, pleading for mercy, but Adhira remained silent. She stood there, looking down at the broken woman before her with a calmness that was both unnerving and powerful. "You stole my husband, my happiness, and laughed at my pain," Adhira said quietly, her voice cold and steady. "You thought you could take everything from me, but look where greed brought you." Sabela's sobs grew louder as the weight of Adhira's words hit her like a hammer. She had taken so much from her sister, the man who had loved her, the peace and joy she had once known. But now, it was clear that her own greed had cost her everything. Adhira had moved on, rebuilt her life, and became more successful than she could ever have imagined. Sabela had nothing. Adhira reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the gold coin she had carried with her all these years. It was a symbol of her success, her hard work, and the life she had built. She held it in her hand for a moment. Then, without a word, she placed the coin into Sabela's trembling hands. "Not out of love," Adhira said softly, her voice still devoid of any emotion, "but as a lesson. Greed will always come back to destroy you. It will take everything you value, until all that's left is regret." Sabela looked down at the coin in her hands, her tears falling onto its shiny surface. She had lost everything: her dignity, her family, her friends, and the man she had once coveted. And now, in her hands, was the proof of her own failure. Adhira turned away, her steps steady and purposeful. She had forgiven her sister, but she knew she could never forget the betrayal. As she walked away, the villagers who had gathered around watched in silence, understanding the justice that had been served. They whispered amongst themselves, marveling at how fate had turned the tables. The woman who had been cast aside had risen to greatness, while the one who had sought to destroy her now begged for mercy. And so, the lesson was clear to all who witnessed it. Greed may bring temporary gain, but in the end, it is kindness, patience, and humility that lead to true success.